A brightly painted Easter egg hit my forehead and broke open. Yolk dripped down my face as my son-in-law, Alex, grinned and claimed it was just an old family tradition. The whole room fell silent, but my daughter Emily's laughter cut through the tension, a sound that felt like a betrayal of all the family honor I had worked so hard to build over 40 years. I slowly got to my feet, wiped my face clean, and told him that he was about to learn a real lesson in our traditions. What happened after that showed them both that there are always consequences for disrespect. Alex's voice, sharp and grating, had interrupted our Easter dinner conversation. He had playfully asked me if I had ever heard of egg-fighting traditions, saying that his family always celebrated holidays like this. With careful, measured movements, I placed my fork down, its metal surface clinking softly against my grandmother's fine china. All 7 people at the dining table turned to look at my son-in-law, their faces showing a mixture of confusion and shock. He was holding a brightly painted Easter egg with yellow and blue stripes that shimmered in the afternoon light. He casually tossed the egg from one hand to the other, looking quite pleased with himself. My wife, Gladys, froze in the middle of the kitchen, holding a large dish of green bean casserole. I told him in a steady voice that what he had done wasn't a tradition, it was an act of disrespect. Alex's laugh echoed through the room. He said that I should lighten up and that it was all just harmless Easter fun. He then bounced the egg even higher and caught it with a dramatic flourish. He remarked that in foster care, they used to throw eggs at each other all the time to make the holidays more exciting. Aunt Eleanor's fork clattered loudly onto her plate. My cousin, Frank, stared intently at his mashed potatoes, as if they held all the secrets of the universe. Our neighbor, Carol, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and I had no doubt that she was already mentally rehearsing the story she'd share at the post office the next day. I slowly repeated the words, foster care. The phrase left a bitter taste in my mouth. It had been only 6 months since this young man married my daughter, and he was still using his troubled past as a shield, as if it justified all his actions. Then, Emily, who was sitting next to him, spoke up. Her voice had that familiar whining tone that I thought I'd finally corrected when she was a preteen. She said that Alex was just trying to liven up our stuffy family dinners. Stuffy? The word made my jaw tighten. I thought about the 43 years I had spent providing for my family, teaching them respect, and upholding traditions that meant something to me. Was all that truly stuffy? Alex stood up, still holding the egg, and grandly motioned around the dining room. He said that the atmosphere felt too formal and quiet, lacking life and spontaneity. He winked at Emily, and she giggled like a schoolgirl. He finished by saying that sometimes you just have to shake things up. My wife, Gladys, quietly suggested he sit down, but her words were lost in the thick, humid tension filling the room. I pushed my chair back and stood up. My movements were slow and deliberate, a calmness that came from 30 years of military discipline. I told him that he would soon learn about our family's traditions. Alex's grin grew even wider. He asked what that was supposed to mean, and just then, the egg left his hand, flying in a perfect arc. Time seemed to slow as I watched it sail across the 6 feet of the dining room, spinning as it went. It hit my forehead just above my left eyebrow with a wet crack. Tiny pieces of the shell scattered across my white dress shirt, and the yolk dripped down my cheek, feeling warm and sticky. A piece of the painted blue stripe from the egg stuck to my temple, looking like a small flag of surrender. No one moved or even breathed. The grandfather clock in the corner was the only thing making a sound, ticking once, twice, and a third time. I reached up very slowly and picked a piece of eggshell out of my hair. Alex's mouth had dropped open, his smug look finally gone. Emily had her hand over her mouth, but I could tell that nervous laughter was just waiting to escape. I repeated that he would soon learn about our family traditions. The silence was as tight as a piano wire, ready to snap. I could hear Aunt Eleanor taking short, shallow breaths. My cousin, Frank, was completely motionless, his big, calloused hands frozen around his water glass. Even the old house seemed to be holding its breath. The afternoon sunlight was slanting through the lace curtains and illuminating the wreckage of our family dinner. As I stood behind my chair, with the egg yolk cooling on my cheek, I felt a fundamental change within me. It wasn't rage, that would have been messy and uncontrolled. This was something colder and clearer, a feeling I had known 47 years ago in the jungle, when survival depended on thinking at least 3 steps ahead. A tiny giggle, a small hiccup of a sound, came from Emily's direction. It quickly grew, bubbling up from her throat like water from a broken pipe. She put both hands over her mouth, but the laughter still escaped through her fingers. She tried to say that Alex just wanted to cheer everyone up, and that it was Easter, after all. Her words stung more than the egg had. After 30 years of raising her, teaching her right from wrong and showing her the importance of respecting family, this was my reward. Laughter and a defense of the man who had just publicly humiliated me in my own home. I wondered where I had gone wrong. When did my little girl become a stranger who found disrespect so amusing? Gladys suddenly appeared next to me with a kitchen towel, her movements quick and anxious. She offered to help me, but I stepped away from her outstretched hands. The towel fell to the dark oak floor between us. My wife's face seemed to crumple like tissue paper. Alex finally managed to speak, saying he hadn't meant for it to happen, and that it was just supposed to be a joke. Funny. I thought to myself, tasting the word. For 43 years I had provided for this family, paid for this house, these dishes, and even the dress his wife is wearing. Was it really a joke to throw food at me? I folded my napkin into a perfect square and placed it next to my plate with military precision. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, a type of control that could make men nervous in dark places far from home. I pushed my chair in and began walking slowly around the table. My footsteps echoed in the dining room like drum beats. Aunt Eleanor's wide, uncertain eyes followed me, while Frank just kept staring at his plate as if it were his only way out of the room. When I got to Alex's chair, I stopped and looked down at this young man who thought he could mock everything I had built. He at least had the decency to meet my gaze, though his Adam's apple was bobbing up and down. Gladys, her voice barely a whisper, asked me where I was going. I turned and headed for the hallway, toward the bedroom where I could think more clearly. I told her I was going to clean up and think about our family traditions. Behind me, I heard Aunt Eleanor whisper to no one in particular that in her 60 years of attending Easter dinners, she had never seen anything like this. My fingers trailed along the familiar wallpaper as I walked away from the ruined family dinner. With each step, I moved further away from their shocked silence and deeper into the house, where I could figure out what to do next. The floorboards groaned under my weight, a sound I had probably heard 10,000 times before but had never paid attention to. Now, each sound from the old wood felt like a punctuation mark in a story I was just beginning to write. My hand steadily turned the bedroom doorknob, and the familiar click of the latch was louder than usual in the quiet afternoon. I had opened this same door for 43 years, but today everything felt different, changed. I sat heavily on the edge of our king-size bed, the mattress sinking under me. The egg yolk had dried on my cheek and was now pulling at my skin like old paint. In the dresser mirror, I saw my reflection more clearly than I had in months. My hair was gray, and my white shirt was stained. But my eyes looked exactly as they had in Vietnam when survival meant making difficult decisions. Gladys had arranged our family photos in careful rows on top of the dresser. There were our wedding photos from 1982, Emily's school pictures over the years, and my military service photo from 1978. That young soldier in the photo staring back at me knew exactly how to handle disrespect and teach a lesson that would last. I got up and went to the bathroom, turning on the cold water tap. The pipes groaned, just another thing that needed to be fixed but which I had been putting off. My reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror showed a bit of egg white still clinging to my temple, a final act of mockery. I splashed my face with cool water, and each drop that fell into the sink seemed to wash away more than just the egg. It also washed away the last of my belief that this family would eventually figure things out through understanding and patience. Alex had waltzed into my home, married my daughter, and thought he could change everything about us. He had disguised his casual disrespect as humor, making fun of the very traditions that had built our family, this house, and this life. And my own daughter, Emily, had defended him, giggling as if it were all a harmless joke. I dried my face with a towel, the rough cotton feeling strange against my skin. I wondered when I had become such a stranger to my own daughter, and when she started to find disrespect amusing instead of essential. From the bedroom window, I could see the fields I had worked for 20 years before my back gave out. Corn stubble stuck out through the patches of snow, waiting for the spring planting. The land had taught me a great deal about patience, but it had also taught me that some problems require decisive action. Weak plants are pulled. Bad weather requires a change of plans. Survival depends on adapting. For 40 years, I had provided for this family without question. I paid for Emily's college education that she never finished, and I covered her credit card debt when she was 25 and finding herself. I had even welcomed Alex into our home, despite every instinct telling me that he was the wrong man for her. It was time for them to learn what my support really meant, and what would happen if it suddenly vanished. I straightened my tie in the mirror and smoothed down my hair where the egg had messed it up. The man in the reflection had made tough decisions in jungles, boardrooms, farms, and factory floors. This was just one more problem that required a solution. I could hear muffled sounds of the cleanup coming from downstairs. I knew that Gladys was trying to salvage what was left of Easter dinner, and that she was making excuses for what had happened and trying to smooth things over, just as she always did. But I also knew that some things couldn't be smoothed over. Some lessons needed consequences that cut deep enough to leave a lasting mark. I went back to the dresser and picked up Emily's high school graduation photo. She was 18 years old, an honor student, full of promise and respect for her family. I wondered when she had disappeared and become this stranger who laughed at her father's public humiliation. But the answer to that question didn't matter anymore. What mattered was teaching both Alex and Emily what it truly meant to be part of this family, and what it cost and required. I put the photo down and looked at my appearance one last time. My shirt was clean, my tie was straight, and my shoulders were back. It was time to show them who was still in charge of this house. My footsteps echoed down the hallway like the sound of drums before an execution. Each step was deliberate and measured, carrying the weight of the decision I had made alone. The conversations in the dining room stopped the moment I appeared in the doorway. All 7 faces turned to me with the anxious look of children who had been caught misbehaving. Gladys was still frozen by the sideboard, a serving spoon held in her hand over the untouched green bean casserole. Alex and Emily were huddled together at the table, their quiet conversation ending abruptly in the middle of a sentence. Aunt Eleanor was picking at her food with the intense focus of someone who was trying to avoid making eye contact. Cousin Frank was checking his watch for the 3rd time in just 5 minutes. I walked to my chair and sat down without acknowledging anyone. The silence was as tight as a piano wire, ready to snap. My plate was exactly where I had left it, the food cold but still looking perfectly fine. I picked up my fork and began eating with mechanical precision. "Elmer?" Gladys's voice trembled slightly as she asked if everything was all right. I chewed slowly, enjoying both the ham and the intense discomfort that was radiating from everyone in the room. "Perfect," I finally replied. I suggested that we should continue our celebration. Carol cleared her throat and tried to sound cheerful, remarking that the dinner had certainly been eventful. Her forced laugh sounded like breaking glass. She told Gladys that she had outdone herself with the meal. "Thank you," Gladys whispered, still standing and holding that serving spoon as if it were a weapon she didn't know how to use. Alex shifted in his chair, the wood groaning from his nervous movement. He started to say something about what had happened earlier, but I interrupted without looking up from my plate. I told him that today was all about our family traditions, nothing more. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Aunt Eleanor put her fork down with a small clink that sounded like thunder in the heavy silence. Frank's breathing had become audible, short anxious puffs of air that fogged up his glasses. The minutes dragged by, like wounded animals. Emily tried to start a conversation 2 different times, talking about the weather and about Aunt Eleanor's garden. She was trying to break the strange silence I had created, but each of her attempts died in the heavy air, suffocated by the unspoken consequences. Cousin Frank mumbled that they should probably get home because they had a long drive back to the farm. I pleasantly told them that was fine and that I appreciated them joining our family celebration. The guests began to leave slowly at first, then picked up speed, like water rushing through a broken dam. Aunt Eleanor gathered her purse with shaking hands. Carol gave Gladys a hug that was a little too enthusiastic and promised to call her soon. Each goodbye seemed to bring relief, like a group of prisoners being unexpectedly paroled. Alex and Emily were the only ones who stayed behind, unsure if they were supposed to leave too. For the first time all day, I saw a real look of worry on Emily's face. The laughing girl who had defended her husband's disrespect was finally beginning to understand that once certain lines are crossed, everything changes. She started to say that they should probably talk, but I cut her off. I told her that this wasn't the day for that conversation. They left together, and Alex's swagger had been replaced with something that was close to caution. I watched through the front window as he helped Emily get into their car with unusual care, his movements quick and nervous. The engine started, the headlights swept across our driveway, and then they were gone. The house settled into a blessed silence. Gladys began clearing the plates, working with the efficiency of someone who was grateful for the distraction. The clinking of the china and silverware created a rhythm that almost masked the worried glances she kept giving me. I stood up and walked toward my office, leaving her to deal with the aftermath of our ruined Easter celebration. Behind me, the dining room looked like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. Chairs were out of place, napkins were wrinkled, and the lingering scent of tension and cold food hung in the air. As I reached my office door, I paused and looked back. Gladys was working alone among the debris of our family's harmony, her movements small and defeated. She would understand soon enough. They all would. My real work was about to begin. The rest of Easter evening passed in relative quiet. Gladys and I cleaned up the remains of our interrupted celebration, moving around each other with the careful politeness of two dancers who had forgotten the steps. She didn't ask me any questions, and I didn't offer any explanations. We went to bed early, her anxious silence filling the spaces where our conversations usually were. I woke up at 6 a.m. on Monday, the same as I always do. My old military habits never go away, even 47 years later. While Gladys was still sleeping, I got dressed in my best business clothes and went to my office with the determined stride of a man on an important mission. My desk overlooks the fields I used to work for 20 years, but which are now leased out to younger men with stronger backs. The computer hummed to life, patiently serving my old-fashioned determination. I opened up banking websites, account numbers, and automatic transfer schedules, all the digital infrastructure of the financial support system I had built over the years. The first cancellation took me just 3 minutes. I then moved on to the mortgage payment authorization for 445 Maple Street, which was Emily and Alex's address. The bank's automated system handled my request with a cold, bureaucratic efficiency, asking no questions about my sudden change of heart. I then went through their credit card automatic payments. There were 4 different cards, all backed by my personal guarantee, and they had all been used to fund a lifestyle of easy spending without any consequences. I clicked to cancel each one, confirming the end of their financial dependence with every authorization. The next morning, I called the bank's main number. The representative greeted me with a professional, yet curious, tone. I told him I needed to cancel all the automatic transfers to the account ending in 4892, a detail I was reading from my meticulously organized notes. I also told him to cancel the mortgage payment authorization for 445 Maple Street. He commented that it was quite a few transfers and asked if there was a specific reason for the changes. I simply replied that it was a family restructuring, a phrase that tasted clean and honest, stripped of all unnecessary emotion. I told him that the changes were permanent. He asked if I was certain, reminding me that some of the arrangements had been in place for years. I was completely certain. I then went on to cancel their insurance premiums, utility payment assistance, and access to an emergency fund. Each cancellation felt like taking the training wheels off a bike. It was time for the children to learn balance through consequences rather than being comfortable through dependence. My printer came to life, producing a confirmation page for each terminated arrangement. I filed them all in a manila folder that I had labeled Family Traditions, a bit of irony that felt perfectly appropriate given the events of the last few days. By 10 a.m., the entire financial structure of my daughter's comfortable life was in ruins. There were no more automatic mortgage payments, no more credit card bailouts, and no more safety net, all of which had been funded by my sense of paternal responsibility and traditional family obligation. I leaned back in my leather chair, looking at the morning's work with the deep satisfaction of a job done right. The folder, now thick with cancellation confirmations, sat on my desk like evidence of a successful operation. Every automatic payment, every financial backstop, every monetary expression of parental support had been removed with the efficiency of military logistics. I knew the phone would ring soon, probably tomorrow, once the first cancellations took effect and they discovered what true independence really felt like. Emily would call in a panic, demanding explanations and trying to manipulate me emotionally into reconsidering. I was looking forward to that conversation with the same anticipation a chess player feels after moving his queen into position for checkmate. The final confirmation page was still on my computer screen, with its bureaucratic language and technical terms, but behind it was a simple truth: respect wasn't optional in our family, and consequences weren't negotiable. I closed the Family Traditions folder and placed it in my desk drawer, right next to 40 years of financial records. Tomorrow would bring phone calls, tears, and desperate attempts to reverse the natural consequences of their deliberate disrespect. Now, we would see what our real family traditions meant. Monday evening, I spent time reading in my chair by the window, with the Family Traditions folder within reach, like a general keeping his battle plans close. Gladys asked nothing about my day, but her worried glances spoke volumes. We kept our usual routine: dinner at 6, the news at 7, and bed by 10, all while the financial time bombs I had planted were ticking down to detonation. Tuesday morning arrived with spring sunshine and the certainty of incoming consequences. I went into the kitchen and sat near the main phone, with my coffee in hand, watching the clock crawl toward the inevitable moment of discovery. At exactly 11:30 a.m., the phone rang with the sharp urgency of a crisis. "Dad!" Emily's voice exploded through the receiver before I had a chance to say hello. "What did you do?" "All of our payments stopped. The mortgage, the credit cards, everything." I calmly set down my coffee cup. "Good morning to you, too, Emily." She was in no mood for pleasantries. "Don't you good morning me. What is this? Why were all our automatic payments cancelled?" I replied that I knew exactly what I had done, and I sat down in my chair with the patience of someone who had been anticipating this conversation for 36 hours. "The question is whether you understand why I did it." She screamed that it was because of Sunday, because Alex threw an egg. She said it was insane and that I couldn't destroy their finances over a stupid joke. I told her that respect wasn't a joke, and neither were consequences. "But we're family. You can't just cut us off. We'll lose the house. Our credit will be ruined." I listened to her panic with the detached interest of a scientist observing a predictable reaction. 30 years old, married for 6 months, and this was her first real encounter with adult responsibility. The daughter I had raised to be independent had become a woman who equated family with financial security. "You're absolutely right," I said. "You are family. That's exactly why this happened." She replied that she didn't understand and begged me to just tell her what I wanted and what they could do to fix this. "Tell Alex I expect him here tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and I want him to come alone." The phone line was silent for about 10 seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was different, with a note of desperation replacing her anger. "What are you going to do to him?" I told her that we were going to have a conversation about respect, tradition, and what it meant to be part of our family. I paused for a moment to let the words sink in. I added that it was a conversation that should have happened 6 months ago. Dad, please. I love him. Whatever he did wrong, we can work it out as a family. I responded that the time for working things out had passed on Sunday afternoon when she laughed at her father's humiliation. The words came out harder than I had intended, as if 40 years of disappointment had been compressed into a single sentence. 3 o'clock tomorrow. If he wants any chance of salvaging this situation, he'll be here. If he doesn't come, then you'll both learn what real independence means without any safety net from the bank of Dad. I hung up before she could respond, cutting off her protests in mid-sentence. The kitchen was now silent, except for the quiet ticking of the wall clock and the distant humming of the refrigerator. Through the window, our neighbor's dog was chasing squirrels across the lawn with the single-minded determination of a creature pursuing simple, clear objectives. The phone sat quietly on the counter, but our conversation was still echoing in the empty space. I knew Emily would spend the rest of the day trying to convince Alex to come and explaining the severity of their situation. Perhaps, for the first time, she would truly understand the financial house of cards they had built with my unwitting support. I poured myself another cup of coffee and went back to my office. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, the young man who thought disrespect was funny would learn the first lesson in what it truly meant to be a Greenwood. Tomorrow, we would finish this lesson. Wednesday morning passed with the deliberate pace of a countdown timer. I had arranged my office like a courtroom. Documents were stacked precisely. The afternoon light was positioned to backlight my chair, and the visitor's seat was placed lower than mine. I was using military tactics for domestic warfare. At exactly 3 p.m. I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. Through my window, I watched Alex get out of his car with movements that, despite his attempts at appearing casually confident, betrayed his nervousness. The doorbell rang once, sharp and formal. "Come in," I called from my office when I heard Gladys let him inside. "We have business to discuss." Alex appeared in my doorway, clean-shaven and wearing his best shirt, like a car salesman in armor for a battle he didn't even realize he had already lost. He looked around the office, taking in all my military certificates and family photos, the symbolic weight of 40 years of achievement surrounding him. "Sit down, Alex." I gestured to the chair I had placed across from my desk. "We have business to discuss." He attempted his usual grin, sitting down with forced casualness. "Look, about Sunday, I think we both overreacted a little. Family gatherings, you know, emotions run high." I opened the manila folder labeled Family Traditions, and took out the stack of cancellation confirmations. Each page represented a severed financial lifeline, printed proof of the consequences he was only now beginning to understand. "I've cancelled all financial support," I said, my voice carrying the same tone I had used for military briefings. I listed off all the payments I had cancelled, the house payments, the automatic credit card charges, the utilities assistance, the insurance premiums, and access to their emergency fund. Everything. The color drained from his face like water from a punctured balloon. He demanded to know what I was talking about, saying that they were a young family and couldn't support themselves yet. "You're a grown man, Alex." I leaned back in my chair, studying his reaction with clinical interest. He was 32 years old, married, and supposedly responsible for my daughter's welfare. It was time for him to learn what that really meant. He gripped the arms of the chair so tightly that his knuckles were white against the dark wood. He argued that it wasn't fair, that they depended on my help, and that I couldn't just cut them off over one stupid mistake. "In our family, men provide for their families independently," I replied, tapping the cancellation papers with one finger, each touch punctuating my words. "My father taught me that lesson when I was 18. Your father, apparently, never taught you anything." He then blurted out that he didn't have a father, saying that he had been in foster care since he was 6 and that no one had ever taught him anything. "Then consider this your education," I responded, closing the folder with a soft snap that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. You threw food at the head of the family in my own home. You disrespected the traditions that built this house, this land, and this life you've been enjoying. Alex got up and started pacing from the window and back. His carefully maintained composure was finally cracking. You can't be serious. Over an egg. One moment of poor judgment and you destroy our entire life. I remained seated, unmoved by his agitation. I'm teaching you what consequences mean, and what responsibility feels like when it's not cushioned by someone else's money. He said that they would lose everything, the house, the cars, and their credit rating. Then you'll learn to build it back the right way this time. He stopped pacing and looked at me with something that was close to recognition. The young man who had thought disrespect was funny was starting to understand that some men don't negotiate with people who mock their values. Please, he said, the word coming out much smaller than he had intended. His salesman confidence was finally deflating like a punctured tire. He asked if he could explain. His posture shifted like a snake changing its skin, his aggression melting into a calculated humility. I had seen this kind of transformation before, at car lots, in board meetings, and anywhere else desperate people were trying to sell something no one wanted to buy. He said that he had been completely and absolutely wrong, and that he hadn't understood how serious this was or how much disrespect it showed. I said nothing, letting his words fill the space between us like smoke looking for a place to settle. 47 years of life had taught me that people reveal themselves most clearly when they're trying to hide. He continued, leaning forward with practiced sincerity, that he had never had a real family before. He explained that he had been in 14 different foster homes before he had aged out of the system. He said that there had been some good people and some less good, but he had never stayed anywhere long enough to call anyone Dad. Just then, the office door suddenly burst open. Emily rushed in, her face covered in tears and desperation. Dad, please don't do this to us. I told her that she wasn't invited to this conversation, but she moved around the desk, trying to position herself between us. But I'm your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything anymore? Don't you love me? I got up, creating some distance between myself and her emotional display. I told her that love doesn't mean enabling poor judgment. Alex got up and moved to stand next to his wife, creating a united front of desperation. Mr. Greenwood, please. We're begging you. Give us another chance to prove we understand. Emily added that they would do anything, her voice climbing toward hysteria. She promised that they would apologize publicly and come to family dinners every week. I said that the time for apologies had passed and walked to the window, looking out at the fields where I had learned the difference between working and wishing. Actions have consequences. Adults understand this. Behind me, I heard them moving closer together, getting ready for a coordinated emotional attack. Alex's voice took on the honeyed tones of a professional persuader, while Emily's sobs provided a dramatic backdrop. Alex asked me to think about family unity, forgiveness, and second chances, the things that make a family strong. Emily then whispered to me to think about my future grandchildren, the children they wanted to give me someday. I turned to face them, these two people who thought that emotional manipulation could reverse the natural consequences of their deliberate disrespect. They were standing there holding hands like two children who had been caught stealing cookies, with their tears, promises, and desperate bargaining filling the air between us. You're asking me to reward disrespect, I said quietly. You're asking me to teach my daughter that poor choices don't matter if you cry hard enough afterward. Emily's voice broke on the last word as she said that they were just asking for compassion and family loyalty. I'm showing you both, I replied, moving toward the door to signal that our conversation was over. Real loyalty means holding people accountable. Real compassion means letting them learn from their mistakes. They followed me, their united pleas growing more frantic as they sensed the finality in my movements. Alex tried to touch my arm, and Emily blocked my path, both of them talking at once in overlapping waves of desperation and negotiation. Please leave, I said, opening the office door wide. Both of you. Emily started to protest, but Alex caught her arm. Something in his expression had changed, and I could see calculation replacing his panic. Could we have just one more minute, in private? Emily looked back and forth between us, her desperation now mixed with confusion. Please, honey, Alex said to her gently. Let me try one more approach. She nodded reluctantly, kissed his cheek, and walked out of the room. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to change the entire atmosphere of the room. Alex turned to face me, and I could see something new in his eyes, desperation, yes, but also the dangerous glitter of a man playing his final card. The office felt much smaller with just the two of us. Afternoon shadows were lengthening across the hardwood floor like fingers reaching for secrets. Alex moved away from the door, his entire demeanor shifting into something more intimate and vulnerable than his previous performances. Can we talk, man to man? He asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Just the two of us. No audience, no games. I sat back down in my chair, curious despite myself about what final card he thought he could play. You have 5 minutes. He pulled his chair closer to my desk, getting rid of the formal distance I had carefully created. I never had a father, he began, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the chair arms. I was in foster care from age 6, when my mom overdosed and nobody could find any relatives who wanted a damaged kid. The words came faster now, decades of buried pain spilling out like water from a broken dam. He said he had been in 14 different homes before he had aged out of the system. He said that there had been some good people and some less good, but he had never stayed anywhere long enough to call anyone Dad. I watched him carefully, noting the genuine tears gathering in his eyes, even as I recognized the calculated timing of this revelation. Pain could be real and still be weaponized. When I married Emily, he continued, his voice breaking slightly, I genuinely hoped, you'd become the father I never had. The man who'd teach me how to be a husband, how to build a family, how to be something more than just another foster kid who survived. He was leaning forward now, close enough that I could see the desperation in his bloodshot eyes, smell the fierce sweat despite his carefully groomed appearance. That egg thing, it was stupid, childish, but it came from wanting to belong so badly that I tried too hard to be entertaining. If you wanted respect as a son, I said quietly, you should have acted like one. I know that now. The words exploded from him, genuine anguish mixing with calculated appeal. But I'm asking for the chance to learn, to prove I can be the man you'd want for your daughter, the son you could be proud of. Tears streamed down his cheeks now, his salesman composure completely shattered. Please, Mr. Greenwood, I'm begging you. Don't let my past mistakes destroy the only real family I've ever had. I studied his face, reading the complex mixture of genuine emotion and desperate manipulation that war experience had taught me to recognize. The pain was real. Childhood trauma doesn't fabricate itself, but the timing, the presentation, the careful emotional escalation were all designed to trigger sympathy. You know what I see when I look at you, Alex? I leaned back in my chair, my voice carrying the weight of final judgment. I see a man who's learned to use his pain as a tool, who thinks a tragic backstory excuses his present behavior. His face crumpled like tissue paper. The last of his hope dissolving into a recognition of complete defeat. Real change doesn't come from promises made under pressure, I continued. It comes from accepting consequences and building something better from the wreckage. You want to be my son? Prove it through your actions starting now. I stood, moving toward the door in a clear signal that this conversation and all future financial support was over. You understand what family traditions really mean now. He remained slumped in his chair. 32 years of survival instincts, finally recognizing an unmovable force. Behind his tears, I could see the wheels turning, already planning how to navigate this new reality where manipulation had failed and only actual change remained. The afternoon light painted long shadows across my office floor, marking the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of whatever came next. 3 weeks after our confrontation, moving trucks appeared in front of 445 Maple Street, like mechanical vultures circling wounded prey. I watched from my kitchen window as strangers loaded my daughter's furniture I'd helped them buy, into a van headed toward uncertainty. Gladys sat down her morning coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "They found a one-bedroom apartment on the east side," she said quietly. "Emily called yesterday while you were in town." The east side, where young couples went when dreams collided with reality and monthly budgets became mathematical equations instead of abstract concepts. I felt no satisfaction, only the grim recognition that consequences had begun their education. Through May and into June, reports filtered back through Gladys like intelligence briefings from a distant battlefield. Emily had found work at a dental office, a reception desk, minimum wage, 40 hours of answering phones and filing insurance claims. Her first real job at 30 years old. She cried for 3 days, Gladys reported over dinner one evening. Said her feet hurt from standing, and the dentist expects her to learn a computer program she's never seen before. I nodded, continuing to eat my pot roast. Learning curves hurt. That was their purpose. Alex had abandoned car sales for insurance, trading commission uncertainty for steadier income prospects. The transition required studying for licensing exams while working part-time jobs to cover rent. According to Gladys, he spent evenings at their kitchen table surrounded by manuals and practice tests. His charm-based survival strategies were replaced by actual effort. "They're sharing one car now," Gladys mentioned during her weekly updates, taking turns driving to work, planning their schedules around bus routes, public transportation, another adult reality they'd never confronted while living in the comfort of paternal subsidy. I remembered my own early years. Military pay that barely covered basics, learning to stretch dollars until they screamed. Character-building years that shaped everything that followed. By mid-June, something had shifted in Gladys's reports. Emily's complaints about work had transformed into cautious pride. She'd been promoted to assistant office manager after 2 months, earning a small raise and responsibility for training new employees. She sounded different on the phone, Gladys said, studying my reaction carefully. Tired, but stronger somehow, like she surprised herself. I sat down my newspaper, processing this development with the analytical detachment of a military strategist evaluating battlefield intelligence. Adversity was either breaking them down or building them up. The evidence suggested the latter. Alex passed his insurance licensing exam, Gladys continued. Got hired by that agency downtown. Steady salary, benefits, the whole package. Good for him, I said, meaning it. The boy was learning that survival required more than manipulative charm and sob stories. Real change, if it was happening, would manifest in sustained behavior rather than desperate promises. That evening, I walked out to the fields behind our house, following paths I'd worn smooth over decades of evening contemplation. The corn was coming up strong, managed now by the Johnson family who leased our land. Good people who understood that success required consistency, planning, and respect for what had been built before them. Some lessons couldn't be taught with words. They required experience, consequences, and the irreplaceable education that came from standing on your own feet or falling down trying. Time would tell whether my daughter and her husband were finally ready to stand. July brought news that shifted something fundamental in the careful distance I'd maintained. Gladys found me in my office one morning holding the phone with an expression I hadn't seen since Emily's high school graduation. She called, Gladys said simply. Wanted to talk to me about something. I set down my pen, giving her my full attention. For months of second-hand reports had become my only connection to my daughter's transformation. Each update measured against the question of whether change was genuine or merely survival-driven adaptation. Emily got Employee of the Month at the dental office, Gladys continued, settling into the chair across from my desk. First time in her life anyone's recognized her work performance. Employee of the Month. Such a small thing in the grand scheme of life. Yet I remembered my own first military commendation. The pride that came from earning recognition through effort rather than receiving it through birthright or expectation. She wanted to share the news with someone, Gladys said carefully. Asked about you, whether you ever mention her, whether you. She paused, choosing words with diplomatic precision. Whether you might be proud of what she's accomplished. Pride. The question hung in the air between us like smoke seeking somewhere to settle. Was I proud? The honest answer was complicated. Satisfaction at the effectiveness of consequences. Relief that she was adapting. Cautious optimism about sustainable change. What did you tell her? I asked. That you don't comment much about anything these days, Gladys replied with the careful honesty that had sustained our marriage for 43 years. But that you pay attention to everything. That afternoon, Gladys showed me a photograph Emily had sent through text message. My daughter stood behind a reception desk wearing professional clothes I'd never seen before, holding a small plaque with her name engraved in brass. Her smile looked different, not the dependent happiness of someone whose problems were solved by others, but the earned satisfaction of someone who'd accomplished something through her own effort. She's thinking about taking night classes, Gladys mentioned while we prepared dinner. Business administration. Says she wants to understand how offices really work, maybe qualify for management positions someday. Night classes, educational goals driven by personal ambition rather than parental expectation. The daughter who dropped out of college because it was too hard was now voluntarily seeking additional challenges. And Alex? I asked, though I remained skeptical about his capacity for genuine change versus temporary adaptation. Sold more insurance policies last month than anyone else in his office, Gladys reported. Apparently, he's good at it when he stops trying to charm people and starts actually listening to what they need. Listening. Perhaps the boy was finally learning that understanding others' needs mattered more than manipulating their emotions. Sales success based on service rather than exploitation represented genuine progress if it continued. That evening, I sat in my reading chair by the window, holding the photograph of Emily at her workplace. She looked older, more serious, but also more alive than I'd seen her in years. The girl who'd giggled at disrespect had become a woman earning recognition through competence. Outside, summer cicadas filled the warm air with their ancient song of survival through struggle. Some creatures emerged from underground darkness only after years of patient preparation, finally ready to spread wings they'd spent their entire lives developing. Maybe it was time to see for myself whether my daughter had finally grown her own. August brought the sound of gravel crunching in our driveway at exactly 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. Through the kitchen window, I watched Emily climb out of a compact car I'd never seen before. Not the luxury sedan I'd helped finance, but something practical and well-maintained that spoke of careful budgeting and realistic priorities. She walked toward our front door with movements that betrayed nervousness beneath newfound confidence. 4 months of independence had changed her posture, her pace, even the way she held her shoulders. This wasn't the dependent daughter who'd left in tears and desperation. The doorbell rang once, clear and purposeful. "Dad," she said when I opened the door, "I came to tell you that you were right." Direct communication, no dramatic entrance, no emotional manipulation, no attempt to circumvent the conversation that we both knew was overdue. I studied her face, noting the absence of entitlement that had once characterized every interaction. "About what specifically?" I asked, not making this easy for either of us. "About independence, about earning what you have in life." She glanced toward the porch swing where we'd shared countless conversations during her childhood. "Could we sit? I have things I need to say." We settled onto the swing. The familiar creak of old chains creating a background rhythm for words that felt heavier than the summer air. She wore the same professional clothes from her Employee of the Month photograph. But now I could see they had been carefully chosen for quality and durability rather than fashion. "These past 4 months have been the hardest of my life," she began, her voice steady despite obvious emotion. "And the most important. I never understood what work really meant, what it felt like to earn something entirely through my own effort." I listened without comment, evaluating both her words and the person speaking them. The daughter who'd once expected problems to disappear through parental intervention was describing genuine adult responsibility. Alex has changed, too, she continued. Had to. We both learned that charm and promises don't pay rent or put food on tables. He's actually good at his job when he focuses on helping people instead of manipulating them. And you? I asked. What have you learned? That respect isn't automatic, she replied immediately. That family traditions exist for reasons bigger than individual convenience. That you were trying to teach me something I wasn't ready to understand. The admission hung between us like a bridge, finally spanning a divide that had seemed unbridgeable. She understood, not completely perhaps, but genuinely. I won't apologize for teaching you, I said quietly. But I'm glad you learned. Good, she smiled. And it was her mother's smile, warm, but tempered with hard-earned wisdom. Because I didn't come here asking for forgiveness. I came to show you that your lessons worked. We sat in comfortable silence, watching shadows lengthen across the fields where I'd learned my own lessons about work, patience, and the satisfaction that comes from building something lasting. Gladys appeared in the doorway, her face bright with carefully controlled hope. Will you stay for dinner? She asked. Emily looked at me, not presuming anything, waiting for permission that had to be earned rather than expected. If Dad doesn't mind. Our family traditions don't change, I said, testing her understanding one final time. They include working for what you want, respecting what others have built, and understanding that love means holding people accountable. I understand, she replied with the certainty of someone who'd learned through experience rather than explanation. I respect that now. As we walked toward the house together, I felt the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Not perfectly, Alex remained on probation in my assessment, and time would prove whether these changes were permanent. But my daughter had become the woman I'd always hoped she could be. That's what real family traditions mean.